Thank you, Ms. Heiner. We have a couple that are continuing to be sick that are out, so they're excused, and we appreciate the rest of you being here. Let's move ahead. We have first on the agenda, Mr. Alex J. Adams, our Administrator of the Division of Financial Management. Please identify yourself for the record, Mr. Adams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Alex Adams. I'm the Administrator of the Division of Financial Management, and pleased to present the revision. Just as a reminder, we submit a revision after the first week of session each year. Only after you hit print on the budget book do you find the errors and omissions from your original. And this year there were 3 of those. These documents are in your SharePoint. There were a couple issues with health benefit costs at one of the universities, contract inflation at the health education programs, and then one of the fund shifts with the courts. The net is $23,000 of general fund and a reduction of $1.4 million of dedicated fund spending. So that's the revision. This year we also did add what we called a conditional revision, and it's predicated on the work of EROC, the Economic Outlook and Revenue Assessment Committee. Certainly we appreciate the diligence of EROC in making an appraisal of our economy, and the message we heard from them about playing it safe on revenue. So EROC recommended a revenue projection of $5.59 billion, which was 1.7% below the budget that the governor's office submitted. And one of the things I submitted in my revision letter was talking about, if you remember my slide, it was a teeter-totter called structural balance, where it was showing ongoing revenue and ongoing spending in balance. And there's a number of hedges that we do when we build a budget to ensure that it will remain in balance over time. Picking a revenue target is one of those. As I said last week, revenue forecasting is a fancy way of saying revenue guessing. So I think it's very reasonable and appropriate to guess low as a hedge. As you come down on the revenue number, that can recalibrate how much you need in your other hedges. It can recalibrate how much you need in your rainy day funds. It can recalibrate how much you need as an ending balance. So what we had shot for in our original budget submission was an ending balance of about $265 million, which was about 4.4% as a cushion. Well, if you're going to build $100 million of hedge onto your revenue target, we are personally comfortable with an ending balance that's closer to 200 million than the 265 that we had originally submitted. So with our conditional revisions, we submitted a path where if you're going to use the EROC recommended forecast and the $200 million ending balance, what other budget moves would you need to get there? So the 2 conditional moves we suggested should the EROC forecast be used. First, as the revenue forecast comes down, the amount you can have in your rainy days come down because it's 15% of revenue. 15% of lower number is a lower number, so that automatically adjusts. And then the second, we recommended that the program that could be eliminated is the Empowering Parents program. The elimination of that would get the ending balance up to $200 million ongoing, maintain that structural balance over time, and ensure that this budget remains balanced over the 5-year forecast. So with that, I would sit for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Adams. We appreciate that, those modifications. And as you said, revenue projections are revenue guesses. And so we appreciate everybody who, particularly on EROC committee, and we have yet to decide if we're going to accept that number that they've recommended or not. Any comments you'd have, Co-Chair? Any questions for Mr. Adams? Senator Van Orden.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Adams, the Empowering Parents, is it set to sunset this next year?
Mr. Adams.
I'm sorry, I'm not sure I understand. Is it set to sunset is the question?
The program,
Senator Van Orden.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Adams, was there an ending date on the program?
Mr. Adams.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Van Orden, I guess I would have to go back to the bill. I don't know that I recall a sunset on that program.
If you could just get back to us, we'd appreciate that. Other questions? Seeing none. Thank you, Mr. Adams. We appreciate that update. Appreciate all the work you do. And I don't know if folks are aware, but there is statutorily a law that says that the Division of Financial Management and our Legislative Service Office work closely together on all of the budgeting. And so we appreciate that cooperation that you're both having. So thank you for being here with us. And I know by statute, you or someone from your office has to be here during every JFAC meeting. So we appreciate you or Misty or whoever chooses to be here. Thank you. Let's go ahead then with the next item is our Office of Drug Policy. Mr. Tatro, if you want to come forward. I'll just mention as he's coming, we have, as you may recall, we're down one staff member in our LSO group. And even with that, we have another one that's sick for a couple of weeks. So we're down some more. And so there's been some reshuffling. So Mr. Tatro has been kind enough to pick up these three and get up to speed and give us our three presentations today. And we recognize Mary Ann King, who's Administrator of Drug Policy, who is here. Stephanie Bailey-White, who's the libraries. I think she's here. There she is. And Janet Gilmore may not be here yet because she's not up, but she'll be here. So we recognize those folks that have joined us. Mr. Tatro, please identify yourself for the record and let's proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Let me just give lay of the land here a little bit. So this is different from what we've done last year. As you recall, last year we'd listen for 3 hours to all of the presentations, and we'd do that for 6 weeks, 3 hours a day, 5 days a week for 6 weeks. And then after that, we were supposed to remember everything we were told and start setting budgets. So this year, to bring the budget setting closer to the actual presentation, we're shortening the length of time, and we're having the analysts make the presentation. And feel free to ask Mr. Tatro any questions. And then when he finishes his presentation, then we'll recognize that Director King is here, and she will be available for any questions that you may have. So that's the opportunity for the administrators to say whatever they choose to say and to answer the questions that come before the committee. So that is the format. So you are first in line in this new process. So Mr. Tatro, it's all yours. Please identify yourself.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Jared Tatro. I'm the Deputy Division Manager for the Budget and Policy Analysis Division with Legislative Services. The first budget before you is for the Office of Drug Policy. The Office of Drug Policy information can be found in your budget book on 6-65. All of this information has been provided on the SharePoint, and all of this information is also available on the website under budget information. The legislature created the Office of Drug Policy in 2007 and placed this under the Office of the Governor as part of our one of 20 constitutional departments. Their primary focus is addressing Idaho's substance use, misuse policies, primarily in the area of prevention. So health and welfare focuses on the treatment cessation side, drug policy focuses on drug use and drug misuse prevention. They do this by working with other levels of government, nonprofits, for-profits, and tribal communities. They coordinate with these entities to develop and create statewide campaigns to eliminate or at least reduce substance use and substance abuse. For the Office of Drug Policy, there are 6 FTP and their org chart, and I've got arrows as I walk through this first one because these presentations, these what we're calling deep dives, are going to be the same for each agency. And so an analyst should be going through most of this, and the format should be very consistent. For the Office of Drug Policy, given that it's 6 FTP, I've aligned the organizational chart to focus on the operations. There's one program, there's only the one budgeted program, and they focus on the federal grants that they receive from the Substance Abuse Block Grant and Program Planning Development Grants, as well as any state support and occasionally Millennium Fund support to address specific issues. At this time, all 6 of those FTP are filled, and we will update the committee if things change. This information will be located in the top right. Finally, we have what we have our 5-year averages. This shows over 5 years they've been authorized 6 FTP, and they've had those FTP filled 97% of the time. Basically, that just means one position was open for a period of time in one of those 5 years. The personnel costs appropriated have averaged $578,000, and they've spent about 83% of that on average each year. What that means is a portion of their personnel costs were either reverted or unspent, or transferred to another account category to pay a bill, to hire a contractor, or additional grants. The next page is the consolidated fund analysis. This looks at the dedicated funds of an agency. Again, the general fund is cash-based, which means the cash goes in, they either spend it and revert it, and it disappears and resets to zero. Dedicated funds, however, the cash returns to the fund. This looks at the free fund balance. And as a reminder to the committee, there you have a cash balance and you have a free fund balance. Your free fund balance is your unobligated bottom line. So a great example is if you have $1,000 in your bank account and you have a $500 rent payment that's coming up in 2 days, that $500 is obligated against that $1,000, which means your free fund would only be $500, right? For those in the room that wrote paper checks, it's balancing your checkbook. It's making sure that you put that entry in before that check cashes. So to read these, and again, I know it's simple, but I'm going to walk you through it. You start with your beginning free fund balance. In this case, we started with fiscal year 2021. So this chart shows 3 years of actuals, current year estimate, and next year's estimate. They only have one dedicated fund in the Office of Drug Policy, the Miscellaneous Revenue Fund. They started 2021 with $12,700. They added a net of $17,700 between receipts, transfers, reappropriation, any other revenue that can come in. They spent $11,400, creating a new free fund balance of $19,000, which becomes our beginning point for the future year. And as of this year, they're estimated to end the year at about $18,200, so pretty consistent. The next slide looks at 5 years of expenditures. The first bar chart indicates the estimated expenditures. That includes the total appropriation, any non-cognizable adjustments, and any executive carry forward that may have been approved. The second looks at the percentage of that amount that was spent. So for 2020, the Office of Drug Policy received a total appropriation plus any executive approval of $4.91 million, and they spent 91% of it. The difference would have been either reverted or carried into the next year. And this trickles through for the next 4 years. For fiscal years 21, 22, 23, you're going to see this kind of gap, and that's pretty consistent with a lot of agencies, especially those that received federal stimulus dollars or additional one-time funding from the state. With those dollars, a lot of them, drug policy included, to get the plan implemented, it just took a couple years. And so they weren't able to get everything executed in year one. Executive carry forward or reappropriation was provided in most cases. For the Office of Drug Policy, reappropriation has been provided, and they are requesting one more year, the final year of that. At this time, are there any questions?
Any questions for Mr. Tatro at this point? See any?
Okay. The pie chart shows the most recent year of actual expenditures. For the Office of Drug Policy, you'll see that 78% of their budget, and this is consistent with all years, is spent on trustee and benefits. And these are pass-through grants to nonprofits or other state entities to help with the work of drug use prevention, because they are the coordinator and oversight with 6 FTP, so they rely on community organizations in other states to make things work. Personnel costs account for 8.8%, and operating expenditures account for 13%. Details on all 3 of these pieces of the pie can be found in your deep dive on the SharePoint. Personnel costs are on page 16 or slide 16, operating expenditures on 17, and trustee and benefit payments on 18. Next, we have our 5-year base snapshot. When we were asked to start preparing these deep dive files, we were asked to look at where are we actually growing an agency. So what ongoing adjustments took place that increased the base of that agency for each year? And that's what this looks at. So the first, we have our FTP. That's at the top. And you'll notice it's 6 for all 5 years. They have not grown on their FTP count, but they have grown in a couple other areas consistent with other agencies. Line 2, you'll see the current year base. In 2020, it was 4,688,600. And in 2024, it's estimated to be 4,857,300. How did we get to the increase from one year to the next? The first thing we look at are the maintenance. In this case, these are consistent adjustments that this committee approved yesterday, and it includes benefit costs, statewide cost allocation, and CEC. You will see other rows with other agencies for replacement items, non-discretionary adjustments, inflation, etc. So for the Office of Drug Policy, their budget on a maintenance level would have grown 0.4% in 2020 and 0.6% in 2024. Then we focus on any ongoing enhancements. And an enhancement could be a supplemental, it could be a line item, or another base adjustment, something that increased that base for the following year on an ongoing basis. And for the Office of Drug Policy, in 2020, their ongoing line item increased their budget by 2.1%, whereas in 2024, it was 0.1%. And you will notice in 22 and 23, there were no increases related to line items or ongoing supplementals. And that brings us down to the bottom with the total. So when you add in the maintenance and the ongoing enhancements, the overall budget increase was 2.6% in 2020 and 0.6% last year, or for the year we're in. Any questions at this point?
Any questions for Mr. Tatro? Senator Cook.
Thank you, Senator Groth. Thank you for your presentation, Mr. Tatro. Could you go back one slide to the pie chart? So on the trustee benefits, we're spent $4.6 million on it. How do we know that we are being successful? We spent this much money, and some of that's coming against grants. Is there a way to say, yeah, we're successful, or we're just taking money and throwing it out there and we're doing? Is there any audits, anything that says, yeah, we're doing good?
Thank you, Senator Cook. I'm just debating in my mind if that's a question for our analysts or if it's really the administrator that ought to take that. Mr. Tatro, what's your?
Mr. Chairman, I think I can answer that one. If not, we do have the director.
Thank you.
So one of the things, Mr. Chairman and Senator Cook, one of the hardest parts of prevention work is proving that prevention model was the reason someone did not or quit doing something, right? One of the things that the Office of Drug Policy does is when they have their grants, they do have a process that in the application, as well as in any reporting information, one is required by the state or the feds to say, what did you use it for? What are the results? And then the Office of Drug Policy is tasked through statute with making sure that the programs they're using are effective. If they're not seeing results, they are expected to then find what else it could be done to improve. Because we don't know if it's specifically a Office of Drug Policy implemented program. Is it the community provider may not have understood what they were supposed to do? Or was it other prevention program that's being done that's funded through the Millennium Fund or other CDC grants, right? So this is looked at, but to determine if a specific program is working is very subjective, but steps are in place to at least make that attempt.
Ms. Senator Cook, does that help? Okay, and you're free to ask that same question of the administrator when we move to the administrator's side. Okay. Other questions? Representative Clay, Andy.
Maybe I should wait for the administrator as well, Mr. Chairman.
All right, yeah, we're going to have the analyst do his thing or her thing. And when the analyst is through, and you're free to ask the analyst any questions. And then when the analyst is through, then we'll move to the administrator and take all the questions for the administrator. And a lot of these are going to be questions for the administrator. And we want to have those questions wide open, whatever you want to ask, because they are thrilled to answer those questions. I see a head shake, yes. Okay, go ahead. Are we through then with your presentation?
No, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, go ahead.
Thank you. And as a reminder to the members of the committee and everyone listening, all of this information, one is on the website. It either comes from the state controller's accounting system, the state controller's payroll system, or it can be found in a prior year budget book or prior year fiscal report. So all of this information is available with additional details if I don't have them for you today.
Thank you for that.
For the remainder of the presentation, I just have a couple more slides, and this will be consistent with all of these deep dives. You'll see a slide in this for the 2023 ongoing budget enhancements. For the Office of Drug Policy, they did not receive any ongoing enhancements. They did receive a one-time supplemental, but nothing on an ongoing basis. For 2024, their only enhancement pertained to the consolidation of human resources, where $4,000 was added to pay their additional increased cost for that. And for 2025, they do have two line items. Excuse me. Each line item is for $100,000. Both were recommended by the governor. Both of these line items pertain to the opioid settlement fund and the Behavioral Health Council and their recommendations. And just to preface, what I'd like to point out for the committee is Idaho Code in 57-825 on the state-directed opioid settlement fund states that the Idaho Behavioral Health Council shall meet as necessary and make recommendations to the governor and the Joint Finance Appropriations Committee as to how monies from the state-directed opioid settlement fund should be used. Such recommendations must be submitted to the governor on or before September 1st in the year before the legislative session in which the council recommendations are presented to JFAC. What that means is every one of these requests for the opioid settlement fund should be in the governor's recommendation, not in the request. However, they were included, and I would defer those questions to either DFM or the agency on why. But you will see similar line items in Department of Corrections and I believe Juvenile Corrections. I could be wrong on the last one. The first one pertains to youth program evaluations. This is for $100,000 of one-time operating expenses, and the Office of Drug Policy would coordinate and they would hire through the procurement process a contractor to do evaluations of projects currently being done out in the community to identify what best practices are being done and what next steps need to be done. The Office of Drug Policy did make this official request to the Behavioral Health Council, which is why this is included in their request. They specifically asked for this funding. The agency has provided some additional information on how this will move forward, and I would prefer to defer those to the director to answer what their plan is on how they want to implement this one. The second line item is for community models. This was requested by one of the subcommittees of the Behavioral Health Council, not by the Office of Drug Policy. However, it is included in this request as the Office of Drug Policy may be one of the best entities to receive it should the committee choose to fund it. And so the basic premise of this line item is for public and nonprofit entities that provide community-based substance use prevention models, they would receive some of this funding. Both enhancements were recommended by the governor. And the final piece is the Office of Drug Policy is requesting a final year of reappropriation for the ARPA funds that they have received for prevention services. And with that, Mr. Chairman, that concludes my remarks, and I'd be happy to turn the time over to the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Tatro. Any questions for Mr. Tatro before we turn it to our administrator? Don't see any. Thank you. Director, Administrator, what's your official title?
Mr. Chairman, Madam Co-Chair, members of the committee, my name is Marianne King, and I serve as the Director of the Governor's Office of Drug Policy.
Okay. Thank you, Director. Do we have questions for our Director of the Office of Drug Policy? Again, this is a new little process we've got going here. Don't feel unsure. Any questions you want to bring up, go ahead and bring them up. Here's our chance to talk to the Director, and get the answers we were looking for. Senator Cook.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. You know, as we go through the budgets, there's money on every little program about trying to get people off of drugs and alcohol and tobacco. We seem to stuff, you know, a couple of thousands here and here and here, all over the place. Are we doing any good? In your budget, how can you show or even begin to show with, you know, based on what Mr. Tatro said, it's pretty hard to show that, but is there a way to show that we're doing some good, or are we just putting money out there?
Thank you, Senator Cook. Director King.
Mr. Chairman, Senator, thank you so much for the question. You'll notice that evaluation is very important to us. We operate with the premise that we need to make sure that we're investing in things that work. So we do that in a couple of different ways. We are dedicated to primary prevention. So our task is preventing the issues before they begin. Very hard to as Mr. Tatro explained, very hard to say that you prevented something, but what we have found is when we implement programs that are evidence-based, we know if we do them with fidelity, there are expected outcomes associated with them. To see if we're hitting that mark, we do pre and post surveys with every direct service that we do. So we get a feel for the youth or the parents or the community members that are taking a course, what their education is about substances, what their awareness level is, and their behavior, their attitudes. Then we come back after the implementation of the program and we measure those same questions. So that gives us a feel for, were we successful in moving that needle? Did we change their attitude? Did we change their behavior in terms of substance abuse? Additionally, we contract, and we have for the last 10 years, with an outside third-party evaluator. They take a look at all of our programs across the board. They use that pre-post survey data that comes in. They also use and measure other elements of program delivery, and they provide for us an annual report. So we get those reports back that tell us, and we can graph trends, and we can graph specific programs in specific communities and see, yep, we are making a difference, or, you know, perhaps this isn't a right fit for this community. This program didn't hit the mark. And then we can evaluate why that happened and go back to the drawing board and figure out what adjustments need to be made. The evaluation piece that came up in the question from the Behavioral Health Council will help us to do that. As Mr. Tatro mentioned, we're currently working with the Department of Purchasing on an RFP for a new 5-year round of evaluation services. And if those funds are awarded to us, that will allow us to really go back and critically look at how we're evaluating everything and make adjustments if need be, and amp it up so that we have the right answers for you when you ask that question. So we're working very hard. Evaluation is key in our world, for sure. And again, that investment in evidence-based programs and practices gives us at least a foundation that we're using things that should be making a difference. And we can also track through youth survey data where we stand. Do we have a decrease in youth use? Do we have a decrease in parental use? So we use that data as well.
Thank you, Director. Any follow-up? We good? Follow-up.
Maybe just kind of around the same question is, are we being effective by putting money in a whole bunch of different programs, not just yours, but we've got stuff under health and welfare, we've got stuff under education, under Millennium Fund. I mean, we're all these programs. Is that effective, or should we be combining them all together and have one person look over it? What's the most effective way to use our money?
Thank you, Director.
Mr. Chairman, Senator, I wish it was a one-size-fits-all kind of solution, really. I think we've always operated from the premise that local conditions deserve local solutions. So we give a lot of that ownership back to our communities that know, what's the problem in my community? Why is it happening? How do I know that's why it's happening? What can I do to address it? So I think that the model of making sure that we are addressing those individual needs in communities, because we know what happens in northern Idaho may be very different than eastern Idaho, may be different than southwestern Idaho. The problems, the concerns, the needs that need to be addressed could be different. So I think there's room for multiple approaches to the problem. I think coordination is key, and I think we're doing an improved job of getting sure that all the players are at the table and talking about prevention and talking about who's doing what. We just completed, using COVID funding, or I'm sorry, using ARPA funding, a statewide scan of prevention services. It's the first time we've done anything like that. So now we can take a look at a map and visually see this is what's going on in these communities. And again, trying to pull that all back in so that everybody's aware of what's going on. And then getting everyone to the table to make sure that we're continuing to communicate and not duplicate efforts.
Thank you. I'd like to follow up on that question because I've talked with the director previously about this. As I understand from our conversations, there's lots of grants that are given out to different folks. And what I hear you saying is they each kind of do what they think they want to do. And then same issue, we've got money in health and welfare, we've Millennium Fund, we've got money all over in different agencies and departments. And just for, I shared with you my suggestion that maybe we ought to look at some kind of a coordinated effort between all of those agencies, and maybe there is that, but I have the same concern that you've expressed, Senator Cook, so thank you. That's just a comment, not a question, unless you want to respond to that. Okay.
Thank you, Chairman.
All right. Other questions? Representative Andy.
Mr. Chairman, Director King, within the next couple of days, I'm pretty sure we'll be hearing in Judicial Rules Committee bill to add fentanyl to the list of substances that we have mandatory minimums on. In any of your evaluations of programs, have you done any evaluation on mandatory minimums as far as their effectiveness versus a judge's discretion?
Director.
Chairman, Senator, or Representative, thank you for the question. We have not.
Thank you. Follow up?
Follow up, please, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Would you? Is it something that we could, I mean, when we have this discussion, we heard it before in committee, very diverse opinions about the effectiveness, and definitely removing judge's discretion puts everybody in the same boat. And there's a lot of concern about whether everyone needs to be there and if we aren't doing harm to some people that instead of doing good. Is it something that that you might be interested in looking at? Or maybe there's been studies somewhere else?
Thank you for that question. Let me respond if I may, and then you as well. As I've worked extensively with the director on what do they do in Office of Drug Policy, theirs is more a conduit for grant approvals and distributing those grants. So the director typically has not been involved in policy kinds of decisions, but there are others around that could be, obviously, law enforcement, et cetera, could weigh in on that. But go ahead. That's my view to help you out a little bit. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't know that I could add to that. I think you did a nice job of explaining things. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Herndon.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman and Director. Just for all of our knowledge, it sounds like I've heard in the discussion that the Office of Drug Policy, that most from the taxpayer's perspective, they're not really seeing it in the public arena as far as the office identity. Is it local governments or other agencies that really see the impact of what you're doing more directly than the taxpayer? Can you just clarify that for me?
Thank you. Director?
And Senator, thank you for that. Again, going back to that local conditions, serve local solutions, I think that the impact is most visible at the local level. And we attempt to do a good job of making sure that everyone knows where Idaho stands. It sounds like we could do better if you're not hearing about that. But that's where the data comes in. That's where we can say, we invested in these programs, these happened, we know we reached this many kids, which is amazing, but not everybody. So we have an ongoing, goal to increase that every year and make sure that those outcomes are disseminated and folks are made aware.
I'm going to follow up on that one too, if I may. My understanding is you and I have worked together is the bulk of these grants are taking place, the effects of the grants in the schools. Are there other areas? You want to just kind of address who actually is receiving, how are we spending this money and who are we reaching?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We get the grants out the door through a competitive grant application process. So every year on February 1st, we release a call for proposals, and they're open to any nonprofit, public entities, anyone that has got a program in place that can fill out an application. And again, we make them go through a very specific 5-step process. They need to do an assessment of their community. They need to talk about their capacity. Are they able to get these programs off the ground and into their communities? How are they going to implement them with fidelity? How are they going to evaluate them? And then also, how are they going to sustain these programs? So what happens if the grants go away tomorrow? How are we've set these folks up, we want them to succeed. How are they going to do that? So there's a process to make sure that we get the grants into the folks that really we feel can deliver. And we do that through an annual grant application process. We monitor the grant delivery through the year. They do final outcome reports. And again, those evaluation components are key in that process.
So my understanding is most of this money is being spent with students in the schools. Are there other areas besides schools where they're spending the money?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, we operate with two different strategies in mind. Direct services are primarily those that are curriculum-based that go into the schools or the classrooms or the after-school programs and deliver direct education to youth, primarily youth and often their parents. We also do environmental strategies, which are intended to change the environment that we all live in. So broader-based community programs like parenting programs, like community-based education awareness campaigns, things that will change the environment that our kids are growing up in and raise awareness and keep people having conversations about this. So two different strategies and populations, predominantly youth and young adults, but we are noticing and knowing that parent programs have a 15% better return on our investment than our youth programs. We've got to get our parents involved. We've got to have these conversations happening in our communities. That's when we're really going to make a difference.
Thank you. Senator Van Orden?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks, Director, for being here with us today. I have a couple questions. I guess my first one is, can we see the grants that were awarded from your agency somewhere?
Director?
Mr. Chairman, Senator, absolutely. They are posted on our website. Every year we make sure that we have a listing of who got what where.
Thank you. Follow up, another question.
Go ahead, follow up.
Thank you. The youth program evaluations, would this include legislation that was passed in the last couple of years that put in place youth assessment programs or youth assessment centers and the youth crisis centers?
Thank you. Director?
Mr. Chairman, Senator, we do not evaluate those programs from our office.
Follow up?
No. Well, yes. I'm assuming that maybe the Department of Health and Welfare, possibly. But I thought that came through a request from the Behavioral Health Council. So I'm just curious as to where the assessments or the surveys, evaluations of those programs would be done. So thank you.
So just to clarify, you're referring to this youth program evaluations. Is that the one you're asking about?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. But as the director said,
Yes.
it was not connected with these two programs that the legislature did ask to be put in place.
Right. Go ahead, Director.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, and I may have misunderstood, I heard you say youth assessment centers, the evaluations of the youth assessment centers, and that is not connected with our agency.
Okay. So well, I got a couple now. Senator Just.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And I must comment that Mr. Tatro's presentation was excellent, as was yours, Director. This is just a technical comment. Could we get that mic a little less hot?
Is that me?
Thank you. I think, yeah, if you stand a little further away, it's not going to pick it up quite as much. We have a new sound system this year, and so it is really live and powerful. Thank you. I saw Representative Tanner.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a quick question on the implemented youth program. I do see that funding was looking at coming from the state-directed opioid settlement fund. When I'm going back and actually looking at it, it's been tough. I've been spending the last little bit trying to go back and see what all we're doing in this space. I know we're spending money on the front end. We're also spending money on the back end for treatments. But going through it, I mean, looks like we're already at $1.2 million of what we're trying to break out now. We're providing $300,000 to students for undergraduate college degrees, another $200,000 to hire and train behavioral health people, another $400,000 for recovery services, $100,000 to fund to launch and expand peer-led support groups. I mean, the list is actually continues to go on. Another one to Boise State. But we're spending so much money in this realm, but no one seems to really have a solution of where it's going, and everybody thinks that they have the right path. Can you justify, maybe help me out a little bit more of why your path is the right path to take, more than some of these other ones, or are all of them necessary and they're just hitting completely different markets?
Director.
Mr. Chairman, and my apologies for the loud, you'll remember me, that's good. We're at the very front end. It's all necessary. There is a continuum and a continuum of care. So at the primary prevention level, as mentioned, we're trying to prevent the problem before it even begins. We know that investment will pay off downstream. We know the return on investment. We actually we enlisted a study 3 years ago now to look at our return on investment. When we spend this much money on prevention, what are we saving in public burden spending? And the outcome exceeded our expectation, which is wonderful. It makes sense to me to keep focused on preventing the problem before it begins. It's a lot cheaper to attend to that front end. The services, as you move downstream, get more costly and more profound, if you will. There is a need for that entire continuum. I don't think we can say we have the solution. Our primary prevention efforts are intended for individuals not yet in need of treatment. We know in Idaho we have a lot of folks that are struggling. We have a lot of folks that are in need of treatment, in need of support, in need of recovery services. So it makes sense to do it right, to do all of it, and to be comprehensive in our approach.
One more follow-up, and then we've spent more time on this. And we've got an early hit with our Senate, I know, to get to that. So go ahead, one follow-up.
I can have follow-up?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've just been going back and looking at some of the other programs that have come out previously to what we're seeing now. You've got the Women's Against Drunk Driving that had come out. There was also another one that I remember when I was in school that came out. I think you had a pin or a flag or something like that they would come around and give you for the drug-free thing. When you go back and look at them, every one of those programs end up dissolving and going away. And the reason that they did was because they were ineffective at moving the needle. And I don't know, what are we doing that's different now? And because are we just repeating ourselves and keep spending taxpayer money and not really changing an outcome? And then this program will go away and we'll have another one that'll come up and we'll have another fight. We fighting the wrong battle, I guess is what I'm saying.
Director.
Chairman and Representative, thank you for that question. The difference is, I think prevention is maturing. We know there's a science to it now. We are learning what works and what doesn't work. So a lot of those childhood programs that we all went through sounded really good and felt really good when we were doing them, but didn't make a difference. The difference now is we're investing in evidence-based programs. These are tried, true, and tested. They have scientific foundations to them. And again, if delivered with fidelity, you can guarantee that you're going to have these kind of outcomes. So that's, I think, the difference. We are not investing in the one-time assembly that everyone comes to and we say, oh, good, we talked to our kids about prevention. That's good, we're good. We are looking at engaging long-term, repeated programs and sessions, getting parents involved, getting communities involved, so attacking it in a much broader, more thoughtful approach, from my perspective. And I do believe we're going to make a difference with that. If we stick to those evidence-based programs, we're going to have outcomes.
Thank you, Director. That sounds kind of like concluding remarks, but I was going to offer you the opportunity. Anything you'd like to say in concluding remarks?
I think I'm good. I so appreciate the conversation. Thank you. This is exactly what we want to have happen with prevention. We want to get talking about it. We want to make sure everyone understands it and the potential to really make a difference in Idaho. So thank you. I appreciate everyone's time.
Thank you. We appreciate you being here with us this morning. Okay, we're back to Mr. Tatro on our agenda. If you want to proceed and identify yourself again and identify the topic you're going to cover for us, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, for the record, my name is Jared Tatro, Deputy Division Manager for Budget and Policy Analysis with Legislative Services Office. The next budget before you is for the Idaho Commission for Libraries. Information on this agency can be found in Section 5, Economic Development, on 5-73. The Idaho Commission for Libraries assists approximately 850 academic, public, private school libraries, including 147 public libraries across the state, to help better serve the communities. They provide continuing library education and consultant services throughout the library community. They coordinate with statewide library programs, and their statutory authority can be found in Title 33, starting in Chapter 2501. The Idaho Commission for Libraries has a current authorization of 35.5 full-time equivalent positions. As of September 1st, 1.75 were vacant. Again, consistent with the Office of Drug Policy, they also only have one budgeted program, so I've labeled that as operations and provided the services that they do provide within their agency. The Commission for Libraries is overseen by a board of library commissioners with the names listed on the left, and the board is responsible for hiring the state librarian. On the right-hand side with the 5-year averages, their average authorized FTP is 37.5, and their filled percentage is just under 95%. Personnel costs appropriated have averaged $2.8 million, and they've spent about 95% of that each year on average. The Commission for Libraries has 2 dedicated funds in addition to general and federal funds. The Library Services Improvement Fund, with information on that fund for sources and use, can be found in your deep dive starting on page 22 through 26. You'll find information on these funds as well as any other funds they've received. The second is the Miscellaneous Revenue Fund. What I would like to point out for the consolidated fund analysis is there are negative numbers, and the agency is not allowed to spend cash beyond what they have. Some agencies do have what's called a borrowing limit, because oftentimes what you have is it's a timing issue. You will see red numbers throughout these presentations, or those in parentheses, and a lot of it just has to do with it's a timing. The revenue didn't come in as expected on time for whatever reason, or they have an obligation and an encumbrance or reappropriation to spend that moving forward. And so this is a single point in time, and so there's no reason for concern. As you'll see, the ending free fund balance remains at about $300,000 each year. For additional details, we can really dig into it if you'd like. For the Commission for Libraries, you'll notice in 2020 and 2021, consistent with personnel costs, 97% or so of their appropriation they do spend each year. 22 and 23, consistent with drug policy, this pertains to ARPA funds and timing to make sure that the programs that are implemented actually get implemented in the correct order and in an appropriate fashion. Both of those years received reappropriation, and there's a reappropriation request this year to finish out some of those ARPA-related programs. This agency, about 40% of their budget is spent on personnel costs, 45% on operating expenditures, and 16% on trustee and benefits. This means they're a resource-heavy agency. Their staff work directly with libraries. They work directly with libraries through contracts, subgrants, and additional supports, and so the budget aligns with their mission. For the 5-year base snapshot, their maintenance budget on average has been about 2% each year. This pertains to benefit costs, occasional inflationary adjustments, statewide cost allocation, and CEC, and they've received enhancements in 4 of the last 5 years. 2 up, 2 down. In 2023, they received appropriations and approval from the legislature for 3 ongoing line items pertaining to broadband reimbursement for local libraries, to hire a bilingual bicultural project coordinator to assist with those where English is not their primary language, as well as to provide additional federal subgrants to local libraries. In 2024, they were approved for 4 line items. The first is for a kindergarten readiness program to subgrant out. a virtual hard drive storage, so to be able to store things with the Office of Information Technology Service on the cloud, as well as some reductions pertaining to consolidation with the Division of Human Resources, as well as Office of Information Technology. For 2025, they have 2 line items. One is ongoing, one is one-time, as well as a request for reappropriation. The ongoing line item is for $40,000 for summer STEM programs from the general fund. For the past several years, the Commission for Libraries has worked directly with the STEM Action Center, and the STEM Action Center has provided these $40,000 to the library to distribute out in packages or grants to local libraries. The STEM Action Center has indicated they no longer want to do this, and as a result, the Libraries Commission is asking to continue the program with your support. The second is the 3rd year of the Digital Access for All Idahoans grant, and that is for $750,000. This will be, again, the 3rd year. This pertains to IIJA funds. The Commission for Library will continue to use existing staff that are also working on other programs. Of the request, $300,000 will be sub-granted to community organizations for digital literacy, technical support for assistance finding affordable internet solutions. The remaining $450,000 will be used to support the implementation of state-level solutions aimed at reducing digital access gaps for specific populations, including rural communities and other underserved populations such as elderly, veterans, and people with disabilities or low levels of proficiency. This is the 3rd year. There is an expectation of a few more, and we can address those moving forward. And finally, they are requesting reappropriation for the digital access, as well as some remaining ARPA fundings. And with that, that concludes my remarks, but I would like to remind the committee as well that in the remaining of the deep dive, you have the key indicators and performance measures for every agency as submitted, as well as the CEC plan, sources and uses for every fund in the agency, and more details on how they spend their dollars. That actually concludes my remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Tatro. Do we have questions for Mr. Tatro? Co-chair, would you like to comment?
Thank you, Mr. Co-chair. Just a reminder that the deep dive tab is on the public budget website for each agency. So when he's referencing those deep dive pages, you can check. Not only can we check them, the press, the public can all check them. Additionally, there's the link to Transparent Idaho. So you can dig as deep as you want onto the fiscal transactions of every agency we're talking about. We hope this type of information being connected directly to the budget website helps not only us here in the committee, but our colleagues on the floor who often have very specific questions about what's in the base and what the transactions are. They will now be able to look for themselves as well. I anticipate we'll still be asked to answer some of those questions, but certainly I will be referring people to Transparent Idaho as well to search for themselves. Thank you.
Thank you, Co-chair. Good remark. Senator Herndon.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. While we're on the topic of the deep dive and the public website, I'm on the public website, and I know I've seen the deep dive here before. Can we get a reminder for this particular budget, Commission for Libraries, where that would be on the legislature's website under budgets?
Thank you. Mr. Tatro, do you want to answer that? Give it a try.
Mr. Chairman, yes, Senator Herndon, this will be under economic development, self-governing agencies. So when you go to the legislature's main page at the top, you'll click budget information. And then down at the bottom, here's Libraries Commission. The agency provided presentation is here. And under budget hearing, there we go. With yesterday's date, I apologize. It has been updated for the SharePoint. But that is the same information with an updated date. So you'll see this presentation as well as legislative budget book pages on the budget hearing tab.
Thank you, Mr. Tatro. Good question, Senator. Am I seeing a light over there? Yeah. Senator Just, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Question on the summer STEM programs. Maybe Mr. Tatro can answer this. I see that this is a program that has been through the STEM Action Center in the past, and they are no longer doing that. Why is that moving? Is it just that the Commission on Libraries can do a better job for some reason?
Mr. Tatro.
Mr. Chairman and Senator, yes, you're correct. Since 2017, the STEM Action Center has partnered with the Commission for Libraries to provide funding for these $500 recipient material grants, if you will. But all that I have that was provided through budget submissions is the STEM Action Center is no longer willing or able to fund the program. And as a result, the libraries is asking to continue it. So the libraries have always done the program. Okay. The source of funding has changed. The STEM Action Center paid from their dedicated STEM fund, and the primary funds for STEM when it was originally started was transfers from the general fund. So really, you can argue part of it is a continuation of general fund spending for these programs. It's just more direct now.
Follow up? Nope, lights off. Senator Cook.
Thank you. So I guess I would ask, why did STEM decide not to fund this anymore? Did they feel like it wasn't successful? I mean, why did they pull out? Was there a good reason, and yet we're going behind the door and saying, oh, we're going to keep funding it?
Mr. Tatro, you may want to answer that, or later when we have our director up there, she may choose to do so. Go ahead if you want.
Mr. Chairman, it's possible our analyst, Mr. Kiaga, would have that answer, but since she's still out, I'm not sure if we ever received such an answer. The STEM Action Center director is not here, and they're not scheduled for a budget hearing, so it's possible that the governor's office, perhaps the DFM analyst, Mr. Olson, would be able to answer it, as I believe he has both of those budgets.
Thank you. If you're willing, please identify yourself for the record and proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Eric Olson, Division of Financial Management. I do, as Mr. Tatro pointed out, I do have both of these agencies. When I discussed the matter with the director of the STEM Action Center, she had told me that they were shifting, they're redefining some of their budgetary priorities through what's called their STEM ecosystem, and they were looking to expand their summer iSTEM activities, which is where they provide professional development opportunities to public school teachers.
Thank you. I see no further questions for Mr. Tatro. Then thank you, Mr. Tatro, for that presentation. Let's go ahead then with our director. If she would come forward, Director Stephanie Bailey White, and identify yourself for the record. Yeah, help her turn on that mic. And then identify yourself for the record, and then we'll have questions from the JFAC members. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, members of the committee. For the record, I'm Stephanie Bailey White, State Librarian and Director of the Idaho Commission for Libraries.
You may choose to back up a little bit also. Thank you. We have a hot mic there. Okay, questions for our director. Senator Herndon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Director. I'm on the estimated and actual expenditures. This would be in the presentation, 5-year expenditures. Looks like back in fiscal year 20, we were at 5.79 million. And for fiscal year 2024, we're at 11.82 million. That's obviously a significant growth over 1, 2, 3, 4 years. Can you kind of explain why we've more than doubled the budget in that time frame?
Thank you for the question, Director.
Mr. Chair, Senator Herndon, thank you for the question. We have had a lot of one-time federal grants that have been provided and funded through the Commission for Libraries, capital projects funds that provided facilities funding for public libraries. We had one-time ESSER funds that we used for summer learning and out-of-school time. And then we've had the Digital Access for All Idahoans planning funding, and then the implementation funding that follows the plan. So it's that influx of one-time federal funds that have really increased our budget.
Other questions? Senator Cook.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. White, for being here. On the Digital Access for All Idahoans grant, line item number 48, Last year, this body appropriated $150 million for that program. We hired one FTP to administer that program. This line item is $750,000. And I'm probably going to sound like a broken record, but over this past summer, as I looked at some of the grants, I always questioned, are we just spending money, or are we being successful at administering that money in that program? What is your measuring stick on this program that tells you that it's successful and that we should spend $750,000 more on it?
Director.
Mr. Chair, Senator Cook, we have not actually received those funds yet. We received funds for a 5-year planning grant, and we have completed that plan on time, under budget, with all of our community partners statewide. So we have a great roadmap for the next 5 years. So when those funds come to each state in the nation through that appropriation, and then it's approved by JFAC and the legislature, then we'll be able to spend those funds to help bridge the digital divide in Idaho. And part of that process, as was mentioned earlier today, is conducting third-party evaluations and making sure that the funds are spent to help Idahoans who are having kind of human barriers. They lack devices, they get stuck and need technical support to help them get unstuck. They need digital skills training in order to create resumes or do their homework. So this plan, I think, is a really historic opportunity. It's very comprehensive. It has measures and a 5-year roadmap to get those things done. There will be regular interim reports, final reports each fiscal year that will show how we're measuring that progress and making sure that we're hitting all those benchmarks and milestones that we've been asked to do. So the funding hasn't been spent yet. We're still waiting for the National Telecommunications and Information Administration to come out with the notice of funding opportunity. Then we apply for those funds based on the 5-year plan, and then we implement that over the next 5 years. Thank you for the question.
Thank you. Any further questions for our director? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you.
We appreciate your being here and responding to the questions.
I appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you so much. Mr. Tatro, this is your day. Let's go to the third one, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the record, Jared Tatro, Deputy Division Manager, Budget and Policy Analysis Division for Legislative Services Office. The final budget before you today is for the Idaho State Historical Society. Information on this can be found in your budget book in Section 5 under Economic Development and 5-67. This is the agency right before the Commission for Libraries for those following online. And for members of the committee, I did provide an updated PDF of this deep dive, with the basic change being the updated performance measures and key indicators. For some reason, the last time it didn't save. So you have the correct numbers now. The Idaho State Historical Society was established by the legislature in 1907. Its operations are directed by a 7-member board of trustees. The agency includes the State Museum, the State Archives, State Record Center, the State Historic Preservation Office, and they operate through as part of the public trust various state historic sites throughout Idaho. Their duties are vast. They include identifying and preserving access to significant buildings, sites, to maintain Idaho's history, to make sure it's preserved for future use. And with the State Historic Preservation Office, or SHPO, what I like to say is it's to make sure that the federal government doesn't tell us what to do with our historical properties. The organizational chart is found here. They also have one budgeted program. They have 58 authorized FTP. As of just a couple days ago, 2 of them are vacant. They provide oversight with administration, finance, and marketing. They have 12 FTP at the Archive and Record Centers, 12 for the State Historic Preservation Office, 15 with the State Museum, and 4 at the Idaho Penitentiary and some other historic sites. Their 5-year average is for 56.8 authorized FTP, and they've been able to keep about 86% of that filled on average. Personnel costs are about $4.4 million, and consistent with FTP, about 87% filled. And the vacancy is also an update from the packet. Consolidated fund analysis. Additional information can be found at the very last few pages of your deep dive, but they have 3 dedicated funds in addition to general fund and federal fund support. They have a miscellaneous revenue fund, record management services fund, and the Capital Commission operating fund. The miscellaneous revenue fund primarily consists of revenues that they generate at their historic properties around the state. The record management services fund, they do have some red numbers on there, some parentheses. This is a fund balance solution that the Historical Society is working on, does have a plan, and will be implemented this year and next year to ensure that those numbers do not stay red. And finally, the Capital Commission Operating Fund. The 3 funds have an average ending fund balance of about $2.5 million. Five-year expenditures. The appropriation, consistent with the last 2 agencies, has also grown. Some of this has to do with federal grants, as well as some one-time funding from the state for various programs. The biggest gaps are in 22 and 23. A lot of that has to do with reappropriation again, as well as some one-time, a $5 million one-time supplemental for various projects. In 2023, 37% of their budget was spent on personnel costs. This is a service-driven organization. They do provide direct customer service at the historical sites, State Museum, Idaho Penitentiary, etc. They provide tours, and so there is going to be a personnel-driven part of their budget. The operating expenditures, a lot of that has to do with it's maintaining these facilities. It's making sure that access is available for the public to visit all of our historical entities. Restoration of products does cost money to make sure it's done and done correctly. Looking at the 5-year base SNAP, you will see that the FTP did increase in 23 by 1, and there is a request. Nope, the FTP will remain consistent with 25. The ongoing maintenance change, consistent with other agencies, benefits, inflation, statewide cost allocation, and CEC. You'll see that their maintenance increases. The largest ones were in 23 and 24 at 4 and 3.6%. And that was primarily driven by the legislature's decision to do a 3 and 4% CEC those years. For an ongoing enhancement on row 9, they have received ongoing enhancements in 4 of the 5 years. And this is to maintain a lot of these facilities and make sure operations maintain where they need to be. And I'll go over some of those here in a minute. In 2020, their total increase of ongoing appropriations was 2.7%, whereas last year was 18.3%. In 2023, they did receive $100,000 for the SHPO, or the State Historic Preservation Office, again, to make sure that they work with Idaho Transportation Department and their federal partners to make sure that Idaho's historical stuff is maintained, as well as some employee compensation adjustments. They received a comparable adjustment for salary equity or employee compensation in 24 as well. A lot of state government is starting to experience difficulties in hiring and retaining positions. And so the Historical Society has received support from this committee the last 2 years to maintain that staffing. Last year, they also received $1 million for fundraising initiatives to support restorations at the State Assay Office, as well as developing exhibits at the Idaho Penitentiary. They did receive a new compliance position for this current year, as well as they were associated with the DHR consolidation. For the current year, they have 4 requested line items. The first is for $136,500 for 2 new staff at the Idaho Penitentiary. The entire request is from dedicated funds. This would be a self-supported request, meaning as long as visitors continue to go to the Idaho Penitentiary, these positions can be filled. The administrative support manager, this is $101,000 with 70% from the general fund, 30% from federal funds. And this is to address the administration and oversight of this agency. In the past decade, the budget has grown for the Historical Society. The cost to renovate and the cost to sustain our history has gone up, on top of the Office of Information Technology consolidation, on top of the human resource consolidation and others. It's just requiring more work for their staff. And as a result, they're asking for someone to sustain and help assist between accounts payable, accounts receivable, as other oversight. They are $37,000 for OID's consolidation. And finally, the $1 million for the America 250 commemoration, which is, the governor is recommending an additional $650,000 for a total of $1.65 million. This is one-time money with the expectation that if approved, there'd be reappropriation moving forward. America 250. Go. This includes partnerships with the Department of Education, the Department of Commerce, Commission on Arts, the libraries, Parks and Recreation, and Idaho Public Television. This includes $600,000 for grants of $25,000 each for projects that enhance Idaho history, literacy, culture, civic engagements, $160,000 for a website to market the project, $60,000 to create and publish a book called Idaho Places, which would be about rural, historic Idaho places, scenic byways, state parks, $60,000 to produce a show that would complement the book, $60,000 to produce an Idaho series on school-aged children, for school-aged children on an oral history initiative. Every state right now is being asked the same thing. They've either approved or are being asked to approve something comparable. This is Idaho's attempt to say, here's why Idaho is so great. Here's why Idaho and what Idaho has done to build into America for the past 250 years. The additional $650,000 is to develop and integrate American civics education workshops and courses. I probably did not do the line item justice, but the good news is we have the director here who I know knows way more about this. And with that, I'm happy to conclude my remarks and turn the time over.
Thank you, Mr. Tatro. Any questions for Mr. Tatro? If not, I'll just say this. We really appreciate your work stepping in on these budgets. And on that first one, I noticed the arrows that you used, which were very helpful to guide us around as you're talking about numbers. And that's important that we can stay with you when you're sharing with us. So thank you for that. So with that, I will recognize that our director, Janet Gallimore, if she'd like to come to the mic. And I believe we have, I'm looking like your whole board may be here. And I'll just recognize Bill Bertucci, who's on the board since 2010 and chairman for much of that time. So, Mr. Bertucci, I'm glad you're here too. Thank you. Happens to be from my district. Yeah, okay. Go ahead. Ms. Gallimore, please identify yourself for the record, and then it'll be open for the JFAC members to ask any questions they'd like.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Janet Gallimore, the Executive Director of the State Historical Society and State Historic Preservation Officer. Good to be with you this morning. Thank you.
Okay, questions I see, is that, yes, looks like Representative Raybould. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Director. I appreciate you being here today. Could you please provide some context for where Idaho's initiative on this America 250 commemoration fits as it relates to other states? How is what we're doing compare? How did we decide what we were going to do? And could you just give us some insight into those discussions and the plans that led up to this request?
Thank you. Director?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Raybould, yes. In terms of context,
just a comment. You may choose to back away from the mic. It's a very, very hot mic. Thank you.
Thank you. This commemoration, in terms of the national planning, started a long time ago, and then it was a little delayed because of COVID. But we started in Idaho earnestly about a year ago with our partners that Jared so noted, Department of Arts, Commission of Libraries, Television, Department of Education, Parks and Rec, Commerce, and the Office of the Governor as our core partners, and then of course we have others, to look at
what we did in the past, how Idaho commemorated the bicentennial, how we did Lewis and Clark, how we looked at the territorial sesquicentennial, how then we looked at the right to vote commemoration. And so we looked at context, of course, because we are historians, we must do that. And plus we wanted to do the right thing for Idaho. And we all know that our partnership between those stakeholder agencies is very strong because we've worked collaboratively for a number of years on these commemorations. And Idaho is, across the country, 37 other states have created a commission or some sort of a governing body to look at this commemoration for their respective states. They're all structured a little bit differently. And so in our thinking about how to look at structuring A250 for Idaho, we did look at a number of different models. And what we recommended, because we thought it was most cost effective, is to have those agencies, the ones that I stated, serve as the leaders of this commemoration, but then use the power of our boards to be able to be ambassadors for this initiative across the state. Each one of our agencies has a board that's already appointed by the governor, so we already have a statewide network in place, and so we wanted to be very cost efficient with the infrastructure because we already had a good infrastructure and a good team. And then we looked at how do we leverage the work that's already been approved. And so you all know over the last several years, we've had fantastic support, for example, the Historic Highway Markers Program. That's a partnership between our agency and the Department of Transportation, where we will be doing 380 new signs across the state commemorating Idaho's story, updating content and what have you. That was already a project that was in the pipeline, so we didn't really have to ask for additional funding, but we were counting it because it's allowing us to leverage the work that's already in the pipeline. And then the proposal before you that Jared has walked through, which I'm happy to provide detail on. What we wanted to do is seek funding for our partners across the state. Certainly, our museum and archival partners across the state need support in terms of telling local stories. And then we wanted to leverage as much as we could the statewide impact of not only history, but across all disciplines. And so that's why we're including art, natural resources, parks, civic engagement, to be able to make this commemoration be the best that it can be, showcasing Idaho's role in the development of our country.
Thank you for that response. I don't see a follow-up. Light. Do we have anybody else? Just. Senator Just, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director, I'm excited to see that the visitation at the old penitentiary is going way up, it seems, year over year. Do you have any idea why that is the case? Is it marketing? Is it just that we all want to get outside? We've got a little cabin fever following COVID. What's the reason for that?
Director.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Just, it's a combination. So of course we are very good at marketing. We have a tremendous marketing director, and he is extremely astute at all levels, whether it's social media or print media. But we also have a very unique site, and part of the reason why we're in the process of developing new exhibitions for the Old Pen and developing its tourism potential is that it's one of 4 like organizations and sites of its kind in the country, where it's a territorial prison open to the public. We did go through an amazing master plan process this last couple of years and brought together a group of national advisors to help us look at the content for as we look at new exhibits. And Dr. Brent Glass, who is the former director of the Smithsonian, said if our Idaho Penitentiary is the #1 most important facility of its kind in the country, it's in the top 3. So I think that its uniqueness and its 4-acre campus is very appealing to families because they can let their kids run around, and it's just very distinctive in terms of American history and Idaho history.
Thank you. Representative Handy.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. So I listened to all of your presentation, and it's Idaho, Idaho, Idaho. Is the U.S. government doing something you can dovetail with for the 250 years? Because it is a U.S. thing, not an Idaho thing.
Director.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Handy, yes, the U.S. government has a number of different initiatives in play. They did establish a commission that is made up of cabinet-level folks, and so they are guiding the national dialogue in terms of creating sort of pillars of the story so that regardless of where you are in the country, you can fit under these ideas like inspiration and what have you. So they're guiding that sort of large messaging. There are some grants that are available now through the National Park Service that will help states be able to tell their stories. And I think as we go through the next couple of years, you'll see that there might be more funding available, but there is quite a strong network in place. And then, of course, we have the 50 states network that we belong to that are working together.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Bundy.
This is more of maybe a comment or an observation as I was looking at the penitentiary staff request. I think it's important to notice, as we touched on the increased visitations, that both of those FTPs are going to be paid through dedicated funds through the increased use of the facility. So we're actually seeing a little bit of a budget increase, but that's because of a higher use of a facility that's also generating revenue for the state and educating at the same time. So I just want to make that observation.
Thank you for that comment. Very helpful. Other questions? Co-Chair Horman.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. Welcome. It's so good to have you here today. I reviewed the detail that you've provided on the American 250 that's on our website. If you want more detail on that, there's some excellent thoughts and the organizational structure of it and the effort. My question is around the money you received recently from the Permanent Building Fund on, excuse me, the storage facility. And I know we'll see a request in a different budget, but could you just give us an update on the progress?
Thank you. Director.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Horman, yes. In this fiscal year, the agency received $15 million to the Permanent Building Fund to put an addition onto the Idaho State Archives building. I think that some of you have toured both the storage facility that we need to move and know where the State Archives building is. So that will add 50,000 feet storage at 3 levels, we're expecting. Very basic structure, but very good in terms of environmental controls and environmental quality. That project is out to bid, and I know that they're in the process of architect selection right now. I think that they are expecting to do interviews this month and then do a contract late January, early February.
Thank you for that response. Seeing no further questions, any concluding remarks you'd like to give for us?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I just want to thank you all for your service and for taking the time to come to our tour of the storage facility. I know it's a little bit hard to imagine the collections that we have, but as you know, we've been collecting since the territorial era, so we have an amazing collection of state artifacts that range from artifacts, three-dimensional, textiles, agricultural materials, and as well, we have amazing archival materials, and we steward these things and provide access to them to the best of our ability, but it is quite a privilege to be able to make sure that those things are stored and cared for and accessible to the future. And then also just wanted to thank both the governor's staff and the LSO staff for their support helping us put this budget together. And thank you so much.
Thank you for your presentation and responding to questions, Mr. Tatro, and all of who have been here with us today. We thank you very much for that. And with that, we're right on time. And so we'll just make this comment that you now have time to work with each other and our analysts on these budgets, other budgets. The time is now yours. And we'll remind the Senate that we're on the floor at 10:30 and the House, I believe, is at 11. So with that, we will be adjourned until tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. Thank you for being with us today.